Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is the last day of March. It's March 31st, 2025. Today is day 542. Thank you for your prayers. I'm starting to feel much better, which I'm grateful for. I wish I could say the same for the news that's coming out of the Middle East. Here's an update. Mondays are often difficult days. There's often much news from over the weekend. Use these updates as ways to pray to keep us informed of the realities of what's happening from on the ground in the Middle East. Some of this is from over the weekend. Much of it's in the last 24 hours. The Israeli military today issued extensive evacuation orders that cover most of the south of Rafah city in Gaza. The move might indicate that Israel could launch another ground operation in Rafah soon. According to the UNRWA chief, 140,000 Palestinians have been issued displacement orders. So 140,000 people affected, says the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini. He said that today on X. Hamas did agree to a new Egyptian proposal that they would release 5 hostages, including the American-Israeli Adnan Alexander, in exchange for a renewed ceasefire. A Hamas source indicated. Israel responded with a counter-proposal and demanded the release of 11 living hostages and half of the deceased hostages in exchange for 40 days of an extension, a 40-day ceasefire. So that was according to a senior Israeli official. They said that yesterday. And Israeli airstrikes on a tent and a home yesterday killed 10 people, including children, as Palestinians observed the first day of Eid al-Fitr. 20 people were injured in the strike in the Al-Mawasi area, according to Khan Yunis's civil defense director. The bodies of 8 Palestinian Red Crescent medics who've gone missing after coming under fire in Gaza this past week have now been recovered. The 9th worker is still unaccounted for, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. The Palestine Red Crescent blamed Israeli forces for the deaths, and they said that it also recovered the bodies of 6 civil defense members and 1 UN worker from the same area. It's been reported that wounded Palestinians are dying because of the lack of medical equipment and supplies in Gaza. This is according to a U.S. surgeon who was working in 2 hospitals in Gaza over the last 3 weeks. Separately, the UN World Food Program late last week on Thursday, said that Gaza's bakeries are going to run out of flour within the next week unless aid deliveries resume. We're now going on more than 3 weeks of humanitarian assistance and food being completely shut off from Gaza. So I talked about Israel's mandatory evacuation orders. According to the UN Human Rights Office, those fail to comply with international humanitarian law by forcibly displacing Palestinians in Gaza. That was said on Friday, and that Israel is not taking any measures to provide accommodations for the populations that are being evacuated from certain areas. And the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu today announced that Elise Sharvit, the former head of the Israeli Navy, is said to be the next head of Shin Bet. So you've heard about the ousting of the former head. Shin Bet is Israel's domestic spy agency. Sharvit's installation will be delayed until the Supreme Court rules on the legality of the dismissal of Ronan Bar. He's been the agency leader up until now. So the Supreme Court will rule on that in days ahead. Aid groups are struggling to respond to the humanitarian crisis that's been caused by months of Israeli military operations in the occupied West Bank. And there are tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians in the West Bank. Aid workers and local Palestinian officials have been reporting on this. So you now have crises happening in the West Bank in similar ways to what we've been seeing in Gaza over past months. Haaretz reported that today, and I mentioned this previously, but that Israel's demanding the release of 11 live hostages. We don't know in terms of this ceasefire negotiation what's going to happen. So Israel's calling for the release of 11 hostages. And so there's still negotiations about the possibility of a ceasefire agreement in exchange for 40 days of a ceasefire. Following his testimony on his aid's connection to Qatar, Netanyahu said today that his staff members, Yonatan Urich and Eli Fedelstein, are being held captive to prevent the ousting of the Shin Bet chief. This was in a video that was put on his Instagram account, and the Hostages and Missing Families Forum decried his choice of words. They said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, "May we remind you that the real hostages are our 59 brothers and sisters who've been held in Gaza for 542 days." Hundreds of protesters in Israel have continued to protest against the government in support of the immediate release of hostages. They're blocking entrances to the Knesset in Jerusalem. This is 14 consecutive days, 2 weeks of protests that began with the announcement of the ousting of the Shin Bet security chief, Ronen Bar. The Israeli Defense Forces probe of Saturday's raid into the village of Jinba, this is in Masafer Yatta. We've been talking about this raid. This was also where the film that won the best documentary, No Other Land, took place in Masafer Yatta. So the raid that happened there over the weekend resulted in the arrest of 3 of the 140 soldiers who were involved in the raid. So 3 Israeli soldiers were sent to jail and will spend a week in jail for their participation in violation of practices according to conduct. In Egypt, on March 31st, today, it's the first day of Eid al-Fitr, there have been demonstrations reported across several cities throughout Egypt in support of Gaza and against President Trump's plan to displace Palestinians. This was after the Eid prayer on March 31st. In terms of Lebanon, Hezbollah will have to resort to other alternatives. That's a direct quote. If Israel attacks Lebanon and if their attacks continue and the Lebanese state does not act to stop them. That was the words of Naim Qassem. He said that over the weekend following Israel's strikes on Beirut. This was Israel's first time striking Beirut in recent months. And in Syria, there have been strikes by the U.S., suspected airstrikes by the U.S. around Yemen's Houthi-held capital of Sana'a. Sorry, that's not Syria. That's actually talking about Yemen. In Yemen, there have been strikes by the Americans in the Sana'a capital. That was overnight into today. At least 1 person was killed. We do know, in terms of Syria, that the interim president Ahmed al-Shara this weekend announced the formation of a caretaker government in Syria that would be in power for up to 5 years, that would lead the country through a transition period since the fall of the Assad regime. The new government includes al-Shara's key allies alongside of experienced officials and some popular activists. There also is an organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons, and inspectors have inspected previously unseen chemical weapon production and storage locations of the former Assad regime. So that was just reported over the weekend. Iran has rejected President Trump's, quote, bullying on nuclear talks. And so threats between the US, Israel, and Iran have been ratcheting up. There was a letter that President Trump sent to Tehran proposing negotiations on curtailing Iran's nuclear programs and threatening military action. But he hasn't waited to target Iranian allied Houthi rebels. And that was, of course, speaking of the US attacks that I mentioned happening in Yemen. I also wanted to let you know, we spoke previously about the UAE and the killing of the Israeli Moldovan Zvi Kogan, who was kidnapped and killed. 3 people were sentenced to death in the United Arab Emirates. I just returned from there. I was meeting with people at the Abrahamic family house, where there is a synagogue and a church and a mosque. And I met with the rabbi there. This was a horrific, brutal murder of this Israeli Moldovan, Zvi Kogan. And so it just was announced that a court in the UAE sentenced 3 people to death for his killing. In the United States, a few updates before I close. State Department announced officially that U.S. aid is effectively shuttering. So the U.S. Agency for International Development, some of the agency's functions will move to the State Department, but U.S. aid is effectively closed. And the Trump administration has fired nearly all of the staffers of the U.S. Institute of Peace. That happened on Friday, according to interviews with various different staff members. The White House according to an official, has said 137 immigrants have been deported under the Alien Enemies Act. And Trump officials have said that deportations don't violate a judge's order barring the use of the Alien Enemies Act for removals. And they also questioned the order's validity. A federal judge on Friday temporarily blocked the deportation of the Turkish Tufts University doctoral student who was detained by U.S. immigration officials last week. And the reason I'm bringing this up is many of these immigrants or people who are coming under visas are being deported because of claims that they have been supporting Hamas or that they have been involved in pro-Palestinian activities. Trump also launched a review into federal grants to Harvard University following alleged failure to address anti-Semitism on campus. And so they're reviewing billions, the Trump administration is reviewing billions of dollars in grants and contracts to Harvard University, according to reports for the Free Press shared by the White House. This was notified, Harvard was notified on Wednesday that it has failed to address anti-Semitism on campus. And so that happened this week as well. I wanted to let you know, this morning I was on a phone call with an Israeli who was helping me to set up some meetings. I'll be in Israel and Palestine and Egypt and Jordan over the next few weeks. And I was on this phone call with an Israeli who lives in Tel Aviv, and he was saying that there's been rocket fire coming from the Houthis from Yemen every day to every few days. And he said sirens have been going off in Tel Aviv and central Israel. So when that happens, Israelis, have places where they go for 10 to 15 minutes. They take cover in their bomb shelters. And the vast majority of rockets don't enter Israeli airspace in large part because of the Iron Dome system. Some do get through. You'll recall last week, the Tel Aviv airport had to be closed, Ben Gurion, for an hour or so, and traffic had to be rerouted. And he was talking about how just the stress of that life. And, of course, that is nothing like there's no comparison to the 2 million people who are living under bombs that do fall, and that, people in Gaza who don't have an Iron Dome or don't have bomb shelters to take cover in. But both are true. Right? Like, it is traumatic to have, I've been in Israel when sirens go off, and it is very stressful. And I'm not minimizing and I'm not falsely equivocating, but it was helpful for me to hear this perspective. And he was talking about how thankful he was for U.S. aircraft carriers and how, they were responding to Houthis who were sending missiles from 200 kilometers from Yemen. And it was a perspective that I haven't heard much. And I kept thinking about the people in Gaza who don't have all these things. They don't have bomb shelters. They don't have the Iron Dome. They don't have aircraft carriers fighting on their behalf. And these two realities are true, right? This man in Tel Aviv and this stress and this reality. And no one wants to live with bombs coming at them, regardless, of if they have an Iron Dome or not, right? And the horrors that we're working against in terms of bombs stop falling on Gaza. Like, we've been working for that, for more than 500 days, and we'll keep working to end the atrocities that are happening for Gaza. And then the man said, "You don't know me very well yet." He said, "You don't know me very well yet, but I want you to know that before October 2023, he said, every week, my wife would go to the Jordan Valley and would accompany the Palestinian shepherds to protect them from settler attacks. And he said, I want you to know that's where our heart is." And I just found myself, I found myself like, here I was listening to this man talk about his daily experiences. And he's an advocate also for Palestinians in the midst of this reality where these truths, these realities, these experiences, they're not the equivalent in any way, shape, or form. And yet he and his wife advocate against settler violence and are against the settlement enterprise and want Palestinians to live, not under occupation. And I found myself, my heart was so full and broken, like all at the same time, just about this encounter that I had this morning. And so I wanted to share that with you because I was moved by that. And today is Eid al-Fitr, the festival of breaking the fast. Muslims around the world bidding farewell to the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. We wish them Kareem Ramadan, Mubarak Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan. Eid is typically greeted with joy and excitement. It's marked by congregational prayers and festivities and gatherings. This Islamic holiday where devout Muslims fast, from dawn to sunset, the whole month of Ramadan, a time for increased worship and charity and drawing close to God and to one another. And this year, the first day of Eid al-Fitr was over the weekend. It's coming to an end. And so Eid Mubarak, or Blessed Eid, or Happy Eid to all of our Muslim brothers and sisters. And I thought I'd close with this prayer from Sabeel, Palestinian Liberation Theology Center, that says, God of mercy, you are the one who opens paths where there are none. You are the one who hears the prayers of the oppressed. During the Eid al-Fitr, be with our Muslim siblings who hunger for freedom as they break their fasts. Be with those who mourn when they should be rejoicing. We pray for the day that all people of the Holy Land may live in security and peace. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer.